My name is Michael Roth. I'm the president of Wesleyan University, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the 20th annual Dwight Greene Symposium at Wesleyan University. And our topic today is a history of race and diversity, and it is certainly a time to reflect. It is a time to reflect on the history of race and diversity at Wesleyan. It's the present of race and diversity at Wesleyan, and of course, what the future of race and diversity might be like at Wesleyan and at many other colleges and universities across the country. Most of you are well aware that Supreme Court will be acting on a case in this term, or this season, which will have a decisive impact on the ability, not just of public institutions, to use race and as a factor in the admissions process, but will have an impact on all colleges and universities. I've said before, and I'll say it again today, Wesleyan is committed to affirmative action within a holistic admissions process, because that has served this university so well over a long period of time in creating an educational environment that is more profound, more dynamic, and has a greater impact on men and women, on faculty and students, on generations of people who have come through this campus. The topic today also engages us on a question about which I used to have a different kind of opinion. That is the issue of protest on campus. I used to be in favor of protest on campus, and I had my share of encounters with the forces of order that I now represent on this campus. And it baffles me sometimes, not that there is protest, and not that I should now have to deal with it from a different position, but what baffles me is sometimes is how to understand what kinds of political interventions are most productive, most useful. It's not up to me to say which ones are right or wrong. I'm sure my perspective distorts my vision just like any other individual's. But I do think as a teacher and as a leader of an educational institution, I should know more than I do about how we can learn from our protests about how to create a more just, humane, and fertile public sphere. Certainly not by lying, certainly not by obfuscation or by secrecy. As I left the football game just a little while ago, a very tense and interesting football game, I had a camera thrust in my face by someone who said he is connected to something called Democracy Now!, a show which I very much enjoy as a spectator. But when I was asked by this young man, why would I want to exclude poor people from the future of this university, I didn't react as well as I might had I cared less about Wesleyan's ability to honor its commitments to diversity, as well as honoring its commitments to sustainability. I certainly don't think I figured it out, but I do know for sure that our commitments to diversity, to inclusion, to affirmative action are as strong as they ever have been. People will disagree about how best to operationalize or activate those values and commitments, and they should disagree. But I can only emphasize to you today, in front of this distinguished panel, which will talk to us about Wesleyan's history, is that the people who are in the administration and on the faculty and certainly in the student body have a deeply felt commitment to diversity and inclusion in the future. We will fight to make sure that this campus is a place where people from diverse backgrounds can come together to learn, where a faculty is recruited from not just the same old groups, but from groups that have been marginalized and are underrepresented still on our campus. We have not gotten it right, but we are committed to do so, as long as it takes. So we have a distinguished panel here who is going to, where is our introducer? David Hill's, there he is, he's right there in the front. So I'm going to ask David Hill to come up here and take over. You're in good hands. God bless and have a great symposium.
Thank you, President Roth. One correction, I am not going to take over. I am here simply to introduce you to our moderator and our panelists. But before I do, I am the inaugural chair of the Alumni of Color Council here at Wesleyan. And the goal of the council is to increase the levels of participation in all manners of alum of color, not just black alum, but Hispanic alum and Asian American Pacific alum as well, in the life of this university, something that is critical as we move forward, both as an institution and in this country, the role that Wesleyan can continue to play. But being part of the 20th annual Dwight Greene Symposium is special to me because I, as a young alum, got a chance to spend some time with Dwight. And he was a beacon light for what makes Wesleyan so special, in a way that his quiet enthusiasm for this place, but also building bridges both among folks here and back, as well as an emphasis on looking forward, is something that I remembered, something that I internalized, and something that I continue to try to live in my involvement and engagement with Wesleyan today. So it's a particular honor to be able to stand before you as part of this 20th annual Dwight Greene Symposium. To my task at hand, I'd like to introduce you. We're going to be two specific, different discussions we're going to have today, but related. So first, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Professor Ashraf Rushdie, right here to my right, who's the chair of the African American Studies program here at Wesleyan. And then to discuss the history, a little bit about the takeover of Fisk in 1969, Evans Jacobs, who is Executive Director of Humanidad, Inc., Class of 73, George Jett, Class of 72, Chief Technology Officer, Award Consulting, and Amelia Burris, former Vice President of Equitable Life and currently an entrepreneur. We need to talk about how we do that entrepreneurial thing. I could use some tips there. And they're going to talk about the history of the Fisk takeover. And then following that, you and I will get to learn a little bit about the Hulet Diversity Project. Discussing that will be Professor Krishna Winston, the Marcia L. Taft Professor of German Language and Literature and coordinator of the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship here at Wesleyan, and then Josh Giles, Class of 96, Assistant Professor of History and African American Studies at Princeton University. So please, let's have an enjoyable time, a Wesleyan time. So there'll be some time for presentation and then discussion, but we want you all to be engaged, asking questions as we all go through an inquiry together. So Professor Rushdie.
Thank you very much. As someone who works in the building at the corner of High and Washington, the Center for African American Studies, I recognize how deeply indebted I am to the students who made that building and that institution possible. And I feel honored to be in the presence of some of them today. Let's start by asking something about the Fisk Hall takeover, the event that inaugurated this. Just some background information for those who might not know what happened.
Hi, I'm George Jett. Excuse me, George Jett, and it was class of 72, so I was a freshman during the Fisk Hall takeover. 17 years old. And one of the things that was suggested we talk about was what led up to the Fisk Hall takeover. What was our motivation? How did we plan it? And I was concerned when I saw that question because, frankly, I could talk about that for an hour. One of the things that is always true when you're on campus, when you're a student, is balancing the campus and the rest of the world. And you know, you see, President Roth talked about protests, and you know, even today, there's certainly a lot of things that people can be protesting, but so I want to just make that point that it's really hard to make to find a balance. Make sure that you are a good student and get your education, but at the same time stay engaged with the world. The time in 1968-69 when we had the Fisk Hall takeover is really difficult to describe because there really hasn't been anything like that since then. The people that are here that are old enough to have gone through that know what I'm talking about, but it's difficult to describe because there was so much happening. When I got to Wesleyan, the campus was alive. There was electricity in the air because of the fact that the students were talking about, you know, all of the things that are happening, the civil rights movement, people being assassinated, like Martin Luther King, for example, and Bobby Kennedy and Malcolm X and John Kennedy, those things that happened during the 60s. There was a rising tide that was going on, so that it was easy for us to have discussions about politics. In fact, you couldn't get away from it, to be honest. It was everywhere. One of the reasons I decided to come to Wesleyan was because I had my own experiences and had witnessed the civil rights movement on TV. You know, I'm 12, 13 years old watching, you know, people calling the military to integrate a school and people getting beat up and hosed down and thrown in jail during the civil rights movement. So I saw all that stuff. So I really, when I got to Wesleyan, I had interviews in a couple other places. I interviewed at Johns Hopkins and a day after Martin Luther King was killed, so I had to take the train through D.C. to get to Baltimore, and it looked like London during World War II. The buildings were burning. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I was witnessing as a 17-year-old trying to decide what school to go to. I remember that summer of '68, I had a little summer job driving my little jalopy across town in Cleveland, and I grew up in Cleveland, and there had been a shootout. A guy named Fred Evans, a militant, they called them black militants, huge shootout, and I'm driving back and forth to go to my job, and Cleveland was occupied by military troops. I'm driving through and I'm seeing armed soldiers on the corners, and so that's the state of mind I was in when I got up here and found that not only could I get a great education as opposed to the sorry education I'd gotten in the Cleveland public school system, but also I could find some answers to what was going on. So those kind of things are what led up to us deciding to make some changes. And we had to deal with the world, but a lot of people, especially upperclassmen who were a lot wiser and less radical than I was, were trying to deal with making some real changes here at Wesleyan. What we ended up doing, and it's funny because another one of the suggested questions was, how could you organize this without the Facebook and without the internet and without cell phones? And I kind of laughed when I saw that because, I mean, let's face it, Wesleyan's a small school, and probably at the time there were maybe, 75 black students? I don't know. It was no problem. We didn't need Facebook, believe me. You know, we didn't need anything. News spread very quickly. So what the catalyst for this, in addition to all those things I was describing, was that we decided that we wanted to have a campus holiday for Malcolm X's birthday. because Malcolm was the person that we were all listening to. The first day I got on campus for my interview, I heard Malcolm coming out of off of a record player somewhere. So that was one of the things, and then so we decided to make that demand, and then in addition we had some other demands. We wanted to have a black house. We wanted to have some culturally relevant curriculum. That's about all I can remember. I don't remember the exact list of demands. Do you?
A little rough.
Okay.
I'm just a little bit older than he is. But I guess my take on this whole thing is very simple. First of all, I want to say that we're all distant cousins. White, black, brown, etc., we're all related. But I may say some things that might offend some folks, but I don't mean it as an offense. I'm just using it as a descriptor. First of all, when we came to Wesleyan, we were under siege as black people. And what does that mean? We didn't have him here. We didn't have a program like he's running. We didn't have a professor like, was it Professor Roth, that talked about Wesleyan and affirmative action forever. We had, first of all, throughout the country, people were being killed who were black, were being hung because they wanted to vote, because they wanted to sit at the lunch counter. And let me tell you, some of the students here represented those very same attitudes. So it wasn't a warm and welcome, it wasn't a warm welcome that we received at Wesleyan. It was a welcome that was somewhat skewed. Some people were happy to see us here, but even those folks were naive about what it meant to bring black people onto a campus for the first time without any supports or any cultural reinforcements. And that's basically what happened. We were an experiment in trying to open up the middle class intelligentsia, but we were, and I gotta say this, that even though Wesleyan meant well, they didn't implement well initially. And so because we saw black people fighting for their rights throughout the country, when we saw that we were getting the same treatment here, we just said, we ain't gonna take it. And that's what led to Fisk Hall. And I think that I can say that Wesleyan is a learning institution. I don't mean that they teach people how to learn, that's not their service, but Ted Etherington and then the presidents after them have learned how to work with black people and people of color. And I think that that's the biggest compliment that I can give to Wesleyan, if I'm gonna give any compliment. I was always mad at Wesleyan. I was a very, and he can tell you, I was a very radical student leader. I was the person who started Ujamaa. And why? Because we had no place for black people to go and be organized. We had all of the Greek frats. Now, if I had gone to a black school, I might have been a Greek. But since we were not in a black school, the Greek frats were racist, and they didn't want us there. And they looked at us like we were monkeys. And so we got to tell you, we did not feel good being here. The only way that we could feel good was by coming together, organizing, and trying to get folks in the administration that would be helpful to us. There were no Gregs, so you got to realize we were here by ourselves. And since there was no internet and all of that jazz, once you came to Wesleyan, you were stuck. You couldn't communicate. You couldn't even walk around with an iPod. Nothing. We had no computers. Nothing. So we were kind of stuck here, and we had to make the best of it. And we did not think about the future and the implications that it would have to all of you. We didn't think of the concentric circles that would be pushed out as a result of our effort. We just responded to what we felt was our needs and the fact that we did not feel we were treated getting justice. I think I should let somebody else speak.
So, let me follow up. Now, Wesleyan was one of the first schools where students demanded African American studies and cultural programming. So you didn't have a lot of
we didn't have any of that.
Predecessors. You wouldn't have Cornell or San Francisco State who'd already, that were in the same process. So how did you come up with the demands you made? Because they do seem, from our point of view, to be prescient. It seems to me that You look at those demands and you see this is change the education and you change the culture. Change the institution and you change the way the institution reacts to the world. How did you come up with those demands?
Well,
again, these are 17, 18, 19-year-olds.
It wasn't quite true that Wesleyan was the first place, or one of the first. I know that on the West Coast, if you read history and study the Black Panther Party and study what was going on in Oakland prior to the formation of the Black Panther Party, they would, and also in lots of other parts of the University of California school system, they were already doing that. They were already organizing, they were already asking for new curriculum and facilities dedicated. I think even on the East Coast, right before we took over Fisk Hall, there was a takeover at Columbia. And I think there was some of the same in Cornell too. So not to diminish the fact that all the upperclassmen here were so brilliant, but we didn't come up with it totally. But I think that, at least from my perspective, those ideas were coming from the fact that we were not only reacting to the administration and the environment here, but we were reading. We were poring over literature. I know for myself, I was vociferously reading all kinds of things that I was a science major, what didn't have much to do with my curriculum here, but we were taking in so much that it was easy to come up with those ideas because we were thinking that way. One of the things that we learned here, or that I hope that we all learned here, was critical thinking. Just being able to analyze, being able to go back and read history. And I tell my kids that now. It's like, you need to understand how to analyze current situation, and you can't do that if you don't study history critically too. Not just listening to things about Christopher Columbus, but actually reading real history. So, I could go on forever.
Oh yeah, but really, in a lot of the southern schools and other schools, things like this were happening. And although we may have been late to the game or to the ball, I think it happened with my class. Because when I came in 1971, Wesleyan had experimented in making its class 10% black, which was unheard of. Oh, excuse me, I graduated in 71, yeah, 67. 10% black, so there was really a big nugget of black students who were here, a critical mass. That critical mass was able to look and see what was happening throughout the country. We were radicalized by Martin Luther King. We were radicalized by Malcolm X, H. Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael, all of those folks who knew and who were older than us and who could see the civil rights movement in a global sense. And so we studied, like George said, and we were radicalized. We weren't naive in terms of what was happening to us, but were we prescient? Were we really thinking the future? We were 17, 18 years old. What future were we thinking about? We were thinking about, at least I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I was just thinking about getting the pain off of me.
When I first started doing this Fisk Hall takeover circuit, because I've been doing it now for 5 or 6 years, Evans and I were the first people to do it, and it's funny, but when I first started doing it, I was talking about I didn't have Emilio. I couldn't remember a lot of the things that happened. I was really just a kid. I was 17. One of the other questions that was suggested was, how did you feel when you were taking over Fisk Hall, and what was that experience like? And I honestly, I'll tell you, when I first got that question a few years ago, what I remembered was being hungry. I was like, I was a kid. But,
didn't plan well.
Yeah, I will just remember being hungry and something about peanut butter or something, I don't know. But the other thing that I remember was because of the fact that it was 1969, and as I described to you, we were already very radicalized. I remembered that I didn't really believe in this as a political tactic, because I ended up really being, and he'll tell you, much more radical, and got left campus and got into a lot of community things. I was part of the Black Panther Party. So I had gone through, and I think all of us had gone through this kind of decision process, because we had grown up as teenagers and we had seen all the violence in the South, all the violence in terms of lynching, as he said, and then the civil rights violence and all that. And you had Martin Luther King talking about nonviolence, and at the same time, though, here I am. I was born in 1951. I grew up watching Westerns. I grew up watching people shooting each other, and so when I saw that, I was like, no, I'm not gonna. I don't believe in letting somebody beat me over the head, right? This just wasn't my thing. So by the time the older guys decided to take over Fisk Hall, I was already thinking in a different way. I was thinking, no, this is just a way for us to get trapped. And I knew, because I'd been reading the other two people he didn't mention, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, and I knew that you could easily get trapped in an office somewhere and the police would come and shoot you and kill you. And that had already started happening in 1968. It was happening in 1967. So I was kind of opposed to the tactic, but I went along with it because it was Wesleyan, it was my brothers, and we did that. Again, I have to reiterate what Emilio said, though. Did not have a clue that 40 years later, I would be able to come back here and see such a long-lasting and impactful kind of thing happen. So I was really thrilled when I first came back and found out that, how much impact that had. My question, though, to you guys is it dynamic? Is it going to continue? We can't live in the past here. We have a lot of things going on in this country right now that are, in fact, the sad truth of the matter is that not that much has changed. It's probably on this campus things change, and my question is, okay, they changed over that first 10-year period after we did that, but does it keep changing? Does it keep changing? But I'll tell you one thing, on the national scene, not much has changed. Not much. We've got about 4 or 5% more black people that are out of poverty. You got 28% of black people, 25% Hispanic, 10% white. That adds up to 50 million people that are in poverty in this country, right? Today, and meanwhile, you got a guy running for president talking about, binders full of women and stables full of horses, So things have not really changed that much. They haven't changed that much. So the question is, are you continuing to put pressure, not pressure, I don't mean, because the administration is not your enemy, you work together. Are you continuing to evolve? And are you paying attention to the world? What's going on out there?
I don't want to take Evan's time. Evan's the youngest one, so he's kind of shy.
Thank you, Emilio. That's an interesting comment, because Emilio and I met probably when I was in the 7th grade. He was a counselor in a summer school program that I was a student in. But to get back to the topic at hand, I have a disclaimer in that I was a high school senior in New Haven, Connecticut when Fisk Hall was taken over. So I saw it from a completely different perspective. There was a term back in those days that was thrown around, something to the effect of the black dialectic. And so if you look at it in that perspective, when I came for my campus tour of Wesleyan, my tour group leader was Dwight Greene. And myself and another classmate who was also in the summer program, we both decided this is the school that we're going to go to. So the dialectic began at least a year before I even applied. And when I came back for my interview, Dwight Greene sat in on my admissions interview. He didn't say much, but I got the feeling that he gave the admissions counselor or interviewer a thumbs up because I was admitted, and we became friends, and he became a mentor. But when the students took over Fisk Hall and I saw from a distance, it made me more interested in being a part of what was going on. And when I matriculated, was different. I was not militant or activist because I was determined to get a good education. But at the same time, I appreciated the things that were being done and the progress that was being made to make that more possible once I was here. And it was individuals like these gentlemen and many, many more, including Dwight Greene, who was kind of a trailblazer in a lot of different ways. He was a connector, making things happen for people like myself and many who came after me, and it's still trickling down to many of you who are here now. So in a sense, that takeover represented kind of a watershed event. And on the other side of that, I have always felt that the highest compliments should go to the administration at Wesleyan, because they could have reacted very differently, but instead, they were part of the dialectic in terms of what is going on here, how can we best react, how can we facilitate growth on both sides. And having that attitude is what has resulted in much of the progress since.
Oh, very, very quickly, how do we feel when we took over Fisk Hall? We were scared. We were breaking the rules. That was where everybody went to school. Everybody took classes there, at least most of the folks that I know. And so the fact that we were closing the educational system down, and we knew that we were not the cherished children of the institution, I was scared because I expected the police to come and kill us. Not kill us, but at least beat us up badly. So that's really what happened. And I gotta tell you, then we were dealing with Jim Crow. Now we're dealing with James Crow Esquire. Okay, so with voter suppression and all of the gerrymandering and all the things that they're doing and insulting the first black president of the United States, treating him like, you know, Drek is I think, your challenge. And so I really want to say to all of the young people here, well, I really don't want to say that because then we'd have a dialogue, but I'm sure that there are issues that you have to handle. Everything's not hunky-dory, even though I know you've got much more going than we ever had. And so I encourage you to sometimes brush against that line where you're a little bit afraid, because that's where you're going to get change, that's where you're going to grow as an individual. That's where you're going to make change. So, would you like to proceed, sir?
Well, I'd like to ask those of you who are in Fisk Hall, you're saying your sense of fear that here you are breaking, violating the rules of the institution in order to change it. We're going to look in a little while, talk about the Hulet archive, and there are some beautiful photographs of the Fisk Hall takeover. And those of us who see it think of the sense of family. You see a group of students who are sharing a space, sharing beliefs. And I'd like you to, if you could, just to talk a little bit about what it was like to be in the building at that time.
Well, I don't want to say it was a party, but we were definitely bonded, because we all knew that stuff was going to come down and no one was going to get, by, because we were all black, we were all students, and we were not the fair-haired children of the organization, of the institution. So we all we all felt stop it. We all felt that we really owed each other a lot. We even had some sisters from Connecticut College come down and join us. They all wore black dashikis, and they came with food. It's always the sisters who think ahead.
Just to add to the answer there, I think that I kind of downplay my reactions, but I certainly was aware of the danger. And the reason I didn't emphasize it was because subsequent to that, I went through some much more harrowing experiences when I was in the party, behind closed office doors in the community and all of that. But there was, you saw in those photographs the sense of family, but it wasn't like we were all on the same page exactly. We had, and especially after we got the Black House, but even before that, we had hours and hours of discussion where all of us were in the same room. We didn't use the internet. We were all in one room, and we battled. And a lot of times it would be just about every black student on campus. We kind of sequestered ourselves, which was unfortunate for other reasons, but we did that because we were dealing with what we had to deal with. Like Emilio said, it was tense. So we would have all kinds of political battles, ideological battles, people that were on at different points in the spectrum in terms of whether they believed in everything from, hey, I'm here to be a student, I don't want to hear this political junk, to people believing in Martin Luther King and nonviolence, to people believing in black nationalism and tired of being the target of all this racism and Jim Crow and we want to just go off to ourselves, to people that were believing in more socialism and Marxism and that kind of thing. So there was a broad spectrum of ideas, but we did come together when it came to Fisk Hall, which is maybe why it had such an impact.
Totally agree. Did you want me to comment on that?
Sure.
Let's see. What was your question again? I'm sorry. I got so into what he was saying.
The question was about what the dynamic was in Fisk Hall while you were in there. So, this for example, Mr. Jett's telling us about the differences of opinion, and yet from those of us who are looking back at it, of course, we tend to see a very unified set of demands. It'd be interesting to see how that came about.
Thank you for repeating it. I think the best way for me to describe it is there were like not really two dynamics, but really two major dynamics. Dwight, I loved him. We used to compete with each other about dancing. He was from Queens, I was from the Bronx, so we would come back with different steps. Who had the best step? Who could do it best? So we were tight, but we were of different heads. For instance, Dwight was a genius at working the administration, the power. I was not a power person. I was a street student level person. Dwight was very adept at doing that, and he was very helpful in us getting a lot of the things that we have today. If we had not had him also on our team, because he was also committed to being black, but he just wasn't the street kind of guy that we were. Not that I was really the street, but I was just more, angry. So I was really angry. I just didn't like it. But the only thing I can say is that I'm just hoping that that you don't look at us like 2 or 3 old men that are recounting their past memoirs, because we really didn't want to give you that impression. We wanted to share with you what we think is living history and something that's still in play. I know that I spent quite a bit of time arguing with my children, who are all grown and gone, thank God, and but I argued with them that, first of all, they tried to tell me, oh, the civil rights era is over, Dad. What you thought was over. This is before they left the house. And they said, now it's economic rights. Then after they left the house, went to work, school, then they came back and said, those white people are treating us terribly. Then I said, aha, you finally got as smart as I got, huh? So what I'm saying is, not that I'm a hater of white people, no, because we're distant cousins. Some black people are terrible, some white people are terrible. But at any rate, what I can say is that we still have the same dynamics. Let's not act like it's a post-racial world, like because Barack got in. As a matter of fact, they made it worse. He got in and then they started treating him like he wasn't anything. And that made a lot of us who are knowledgeable, black people, intelligent, even angrier because they are showing less respect or they're dissing our president. So the only thing I can say is that you have a different set of calculus and different set of variables to play with. We never even thought of a black man being president. Never even thought of, barely even thought of congressmen being president, or congresspeople being president, or congresspeople, or even black people being congresspeople, thank you. But the fact that you have a black president and someone who is so articulate, so intelligent, so much a family man, he's not a druggie, he's not a crook, and he still gets treated like crap. So what does that tell you about the people in this country who are against progressive movements? It's got to tell you something.
Getting back to the question, the takeover, I just want to relate something that was told to me by a classmate of yours, Bob White, and this is more on the logistical, experiential side. He said that they must have gotten up at about 4 a.m., that Bill Boulware was driving a carload of them down to the back of Fisk Hall, and they weren't sure what was going to happen next. I believe a faculty member who I will not name.
You won't mention his name, right?
Right, but I think he has a building named after him somewhere. But, yeah, but he was going to supply the students with a key, or the key was somehow going to be there, so there wouldn't have to be any damage. And according to Bob White, the key wasn't there yet. And somebody said, well, we have to do something, we've got to get in, or we got to wait for the key. And another student, who I won't name, who subsequently I'm not well, had some other problems and I believe left the university, kicked the door in or kicked the window out. And that immediately heightened the whole level. So there was an element of danger immediately, or sort of violation. And that sort of set the tone, and that's when people, according to Bob White, sort of stormed through and began the whole takeover.
Okay. I'd like to, if any of you have any concluding remarks, we're going to start moving the discussion to the Hulet project, but please.
If I can just say one thing, I do want to say thank you very much to the university and the Wesleyan community for supporting this symposium. It's been 20 years. 20 years ago, we were planning this event, and Dwight passed on, and so we named it after him. So I'm very pleased and very happy that people have continued to come forward, and if something has been gained and something has been learned in honor of his name, then it's done what we've set out to do.
Real quickly, I just want to thank you all for coming. I would echo what Evan said, which is this is a wonderful school, and you take advantage of it while you're here. I always tell students every year that I talk to treasure the friendships that you make when you're here, because they will last your entire life. I can guarantee you that 90% of my best friends are from Wesleyan. My wife is from Wesleyan. So treasure those and reach out to each other. Don't do what we did and sequester yourself from, black from white, white from black and all that. Reach out to everyone, because you're not going to find in your entire life any other place where there's a collection of the kinds of minds that you have right here now. And finally, I would just say, think about what we talked about in terms of the environment and atmosphere back in 1968 and 69, and think about what's happening now. Think about the fact that 43 years later, and I, for one, I was dealing with race, but I was also dealing with economics. I was reading Karl Marx. I was thinking about class. I was thinking about the inequities in this society, and seeing poverty like I had never seen it before when I went to the cities on the East Coast. So think about the fact that now we have people, the national dialogue has slowly been raised up, so now you have people talking about the 1% and economic inequities, and people are definitely aware of race because of what Amelia was talking about, the fact that we have a black president that just caused it all to come out from under the stones. Think about what you can do to react to that, to this new national dialogue, and make some changes. Change really happens slowly. But it only seems to be slow.
Ditto with my two brothers. I think you guys go, right?
I think, again, I'd like to thank the participants. Again, it's, you know, it's heartening to hear and humbling to hear the stories you tell. My office is, I teach in a classroom called the Vanguard Lounge that honors the people who created the institution, and the ways that you changed the Wesleyan you talk about with such love and affection. You made it that much stronger, that much more inclusive, that much greater an institution because of the ways that you looked around and saw what was necessary. And so I'd like to thank you for that, and then we'll move on to the Hulet project.
Good afternoon, good evening. I'm Krishna Winston in the German department, and I'm going to talk very briefly about how the Hulet project got started. It is a project that is dedicated to researching the history of Wesleyan's involvement in racial diversity. But I'd like to start just very briefly by saying that when I came here about 100 years ago, the Fisk Hall takeover had happened the previous year, so you can figure that out. And George Jett's characterization of the campus environment, I resonate to very much. It was a very exciting place. There was a lot going on. Intellectually, it was sparkling. There were wonderful, wonderful students. And in my field, German, we had African American students taking courses, which was very, very gratifying to me. I had come from a larger institution to the south of here, and in the spring, when I had been hired at Wesleyan but was not here yet, we were in the midst of the Black Panther trial, the trial against Bobby Seale and others. And what had led to that trial was that a member of the Black Panther Party, Alex Rackley, had been murdered by some of the Black Panthers. He was actually a plant, and he had been planted in the party by the FBI, and he was suspected of being an infiltrator. So he was murdered, and Bobby Seale and several others were charged with the murder, and the trial was about to take place in New Haven. There were big demonstrations on the Greene in New Haven. We had the National Guard. People would go to these demonstrations with handkerchiefs soaked with water in case they got tear gassed. It was a very scary but also exciting time. As I drove to Middletown to start meeting with my department before I was even on the faculty, I was actually passing by the marshy area between Meriden and Middletown where Alex Rackley's body was dumped. And I never passed that spot without thinking about that. So I came here and found the campus really electrified and electrifying, and the presence of the black students, although numerically it was not large, though by that time it was considerably larger than in 1965, made the place very dynamic. And there were quite a number of faculty at that time who were supporting the black students, and one of them was Edgar Beckham, after whom we do have a hall named, and he was in the German department. He was also the director of the language lab. So he was a very important presence, and having a black faculty member in the German department was something that made it very exciting for me. So fast forward to the early 1990s. By that time, we had the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship established, which we had been invited to apply for, in large part because Edgar Beckham was at that time dean of the college. And Edgar had left. Yanina Montero had become dean, and then she had left for Princeton. So in 1993, I became acting dean of the college and got to sit in on the presidential cabinet meetings, as they were called in those days. And at some point during the year 93-94, President Chase received a letter from the head of the William and Flora Hulet Foundation. He knew the head of the foundation from his days in California. And the foundation was about to launch a project called Pluralism and Unity, looking at American pluralism, looking at how we could do justice to pluralism without trying to mush everybody together, recognizing the benefits of pluralism and diversity, and at the same time figure out how to move forward as a society. So the Hulet Foundation was looking for proposals, and Wesleyan was one of the schools asked to put forward a proposal. Academic Affairs immediately jumped on this and had a project, but I had a project also as dean of the college, and it just seemed obvious to me that we should try to capture the history of diversity at Wesleyan before it was too late. There were still many of the major players around, and so I came up with the idea of having this project. It would be a 2-year project, and in the end, the president thought that our project was better than the Academic Affairs project. So together with Michael Casey, who was then in university relations, I drafted the proposal. And we were successful. We got the grant. It was a 2-year grant, and the initial idea was that we would have teams of students working under faculty supervision to research and document the history. There was another aspect to the grant which involved a lot of sharing of personal stories, sharing of narratives, and that was to happen in the residence halls and in various student groups. But the major documentation project was the one that we're talking about today, and that Josh Gild, who was then an undergraduate, class of '96, was a major player in. As supervisors for that project, we had Professor Rushdie, and we also had Willie Kerr, who was the associate provost, and essentially our institutional memory. I hope some of you remember him. But I'm going to turn it over to Josh now, and he can talk about being an actual participant in the project.
Thank you, Krishna. It's a tremendous honor to be here this afternoon. It's very funny how the kind of overlapping circles or the kind of conjoined circles that are here. It's 20 years of this symposium. It's 20 years since my freshman year. I was a 17-year-old freshman in the fall of 1992. And I came here from the Boston area, having some sense of Wesleyan's history. It was in the early 90s and late 80s, Wesleyan had garnered the moniker of Diversity University. Probably a year and a half to 2 years before I matriculated, there was a firebombing in South College. And so there was a sort of sense of this kind of activist history, recent history. I didn't know about the Fisk Hall takeover at that time, but I came and I knew I wanted to live in the Malcolm X house. That was really important to me, and so I did. One of the first courses I took in my freshman year, first semester, was Professor Rushdi's Introduction to African American Studies. And so I was historically minded, I think, already, but living in the Malcolm X house, taking classes in Cass, walking those halls sort of put me in touch with that history, and I wanted to know more. And there were two alums, or two people, now alums, who were particularly influential for me in encouraging me to learn more. The first was Bobby Donaldson, class of '93, who was a senior in my freshman year. And he was the most impressive upperclassman I'd ever encountered. Just his bearing, his seriousness. And I remember a meeting, must have been orientation, very early on in my first year. We met in what's now the Vanguard Lounge, groups of black students. And he conveyed this sense of seriousness of purpose that he wanted to tell us as undergraduates, as new students, to take our education seriously, to study, to not get caught up in the party atmosphere. Those opportunities would be there, but to really make the most of this opportunity. He dressed in a way that was different from most students, and most of us wore sweatshirts and jeans and t-shirts. Bobby always had a pressed shirt and loafers most of the time. He's from the South, very proper. And he was a historian. He was a history major, and he told us a little bit at that time about the Vanguard class, about the Fisk Hall takeover. So this was, in my first couple weeks here. Somewhat subsequent to that, I obtained a copy of a booklet by Alfred Young, class of 1988. He's now the chair of the sociology department at the University of Michigan. So he was not a presence physically, although I met him sometime in my undergraduate years, but he had written a senior thesis documenting some of the history of the black presence. That thesis was subsequently published into a little booklet, and somehow I got a copy. I don't know where I got it from. I still have it on my shelf. And so that opened up the door even more. I eventually became a Mellon Mays undergraduate fellow under Professor Rushdi and Professor Winston. And so in the summer of '95, this opportunity to spend the summer here researching this history and getting paid for it sounded pretty good to me. I had already been the chair of Ujamaa in '93 and '94. Again, I was already an African American Studies major, but here was an opportunity to really spend some time and really think about, in a sustained way, how Diversity University came to be. But I was also political, and so I had a sense that there was more to the story than what the university admissions lookbooks might tell us, that there was more than what U.S. News and World Report might, or the Fisk Guide might say about Wesleyan, how it garnered this reputation for diversity. And so I wanted to look deeper. As I recall, there were 6 of us, I believe, in that initial summer, and each one of us was tasked, and we were all in this sort of collective endeavor to document this history. But each one of us had the opportunity to sort of craft our own individual project. And what was particularly interesting to me in the work that I did that summer was to try to document the black presence before the Vanguard class. I had been the recipient, as many other students had been, of the Charles B. Ray Scholarship, named after Wesleyan's first black student who was asked to leave after 2 months on campus in the 1830s. But between Charles Ray and 1965, there was a lot of time. And it was very unclear to most people that I had talked to who was here. What was that story? What was the relationship between any black students who may have been here in the Middletown community? And what was the experience of those black students here? Who were they? There was no real official record. There were sort of fragments here and there in some official university publications and just sort of in the living memory of some folks. But I set out to try to name the names as best I could, and that involved going through the yearbook and just trying to find black faces. It involved going through the Argus, any kind of scraps that I could find, and then another part, and probably the the most amazing part for me as a I don't know, 19 or 20-year-old was to interview older alums. You know, many members of the Vanguard class had come to campus. They were around. Evans Jacobs, who was, you know, a subsequent class, but he was very much a presence. I met Ted Shaw. I met you know, Reverend Ed Sanders. Many of these folks were around, but who were the folks who were before them? Dean Beckham was one. He was the class of 1958. I think it's important to point out. But there were many even before him. I interviewed Chuck Stone, who was the class of 48, who was an incredible journalist and had covered and worked with Malcolm X and Adam Clayton Powell and all these figures from the civil rights era. I interviewed alums from the 1930s, classes of 35 and 37, I believe, by telephone. And so that was a remarkable thing, to actually sort of reach back into the past and make sure that they were also included. Their stories were also part of the story of how Wesleyan came to be. But each one of us on the project had a different slice of the puzzle. And it wasn't only about African American students, and that's important to kind of underscore. I mean, it was the entirety. The Asian and Asian American presence on this campus is a very particular story and a very interesting story, and I think one that's not always as well recognized and celebrated. And same with the Latino presence, Latina presence, the Native American presence. And so each one of those stories was a thread that had to be woven into this. But what I think is important, just in closing, is to say that this has to be a critical history. This has to be a history that deals with all the complexity, all the students who left, who were kicked out, who just couldn't make it here because they weren't supported properly, the faculty who could have been hired but weren't, the faculty that were here but weren't tenured. I mean, all of that is part of the story also, and it was my understanding then, and it's even more so my understanding now that I am a faculty member at Princeton, that each of these institutions has to grapple with this history and have an honest grappling with the history, not one that's solely celebratory. So that to me was the best part of the Hulet archive.
Now this archive, Krishna, where is it housed and how can someone see it?
Yes, the archive is housed in special collections, and Lee Rayford of the class of '94, who is now tenured at Berkeley, wrote an excellent introduction, a critical introduction to the whole collection. So anyone who wants to use those materials is free to get in touch with special collections in the library with the archivists, and the materials are all available for research, and they have been used by quite a few students who are interested in researching this history. And I would like to put in a plea to any alumni who are here, and also to students currently at Wesleyan, to consider donating materials to the archive. We very much want it to be a living, growing archive. I've asked Evans Jacobs to give us some of his wonderful photographs, and I hope that I've planted an idea in his mind. But nowadays it's so easy to send things digitally. So many of you probably have not just still photographs, but also films, also research papers that you wrote, also diaries, or more personal things, if you would be willing to have other people see them. What we really, really want to see this history maintained, added to, expanded. And I would be happy to talk to anybody who's interested in donating anything, and certainly the university archivists would be interested too.
Okay. I feel like I'm on NPR. And where would people who wanted to donate send this material?
You would send material to Olin Library, Archives and Special Collections, Wesleyan University, and I think you all know the address.
Okay. I have, the office I have now used to be Jerry Watts's office, and I think just before the Hulet project or during it, I started searching through. It's got closets inside of closets, and It's in, you know, the Center for African American Studies is an old building. And I happened to find a box of photographs from the Fisk Hall takeover there. So again, to encourage you, to those of you who are alums, to look. And these are materials that we want housed here. You've heard how important it is for those who came after the Vanguard class to know that history. We've heard about Lee Rayford, Bobby Donaldson, Josh Gall. These are all now professors who've all been interested in the institution they attended as undergraduates. I'm not saying it's a cause and effect relationship, but it is important to know where you go so that you can know where to go. So please do send those. Please, we will. This is the last day of the drive. Please send those materials to us.
May I add just a little footnote to that? If you have photographs and papers in a shoebox somewhere, please consider that the archivists know how to preserve things. They have proper acid-free boxes, and they know how to catalog things. They know how to make them available to others. So you would be doing a tremendous favor, not just to me, not just to Josh, not just to the other gentlemen on the panel, but to future generations, if you were willing to turn over some of these materials for preservation.
Okay. I think we're going to be getting ready to field any questions you have for all of the panelists here. Is there yes? Oh.
Hi, my name is Dorisol Inoa. I'm a senior here at Wesleyan, and thank you all for coming along. It's always great to hear about these wonderful stories. As you can probably tell, the population of students of color on campus has definitely grown since back in the day, and it's increasingly more difficult for us to coordinate as a collective to really agree on things and really come together and make change. And I know I didn't realize, but apparently this was also an issue when you were organizing the Fisk Hall. And so as someone who, you know, really wants to make change, and I know that I'm not the only one, but we just don't know how to really build those bridges. What advice do you have for us students to really get past that and come together on these issues? Thanks.
Well, just to clarify, there's a couple different causes for problems with organizing and reaching out. Now, one of them is just the logistics, and the other may be because of the diversity. So I think that you were talking about the latter, correct? You having problems coming together and coordinating and getting things done because of diversity and because there's lots of different organizations and everyone has all that. And I think what I would say to that is that, and this was also true back in 1968-69, I went through an extremely furious period when I woke up to the racism that was going on in this country, angry as hell, really, and still am. Every other day I get angry about something. But the next phase of my critical thinking and education was to look at economics, look at what is happening, look at what the stratification that happens in the greatest country in the world, with the richest country in the world. So I think that that to me is the basis for coming together across the diversity spectrum, is looking at what is happening. As I was saying earlier, why are there 50 million people below the poverty line in this country? You know, so I think there's a lot of other ways that you can come together after you get over the fact that, you know, people look a little different because everybody migrated from East Africa 90,000 years ago and changed, you know, the way they look. Once you get over that and you realize, like Emilio said, we're all cousins or brothers and sisters, then there's some more important things to think about. I would try to use that as a lever.
I'm going to say something crazy and stupid, but this is not the first time. Sometimes, and it may not even be an answer, sometimes people of color and people who are been colonized don't rise to the occasion until they really are pushed against the wall. And one of my concerns about Wesleyan is, you know, we came in and there was a dearth of opportunities for us. There was a dearth of services. We had no radio stations that played our music. We had no mixes where we could dance with girls that looked like us. I mean, it was, and I don't know about you folks, but I get the impression you folks have, I don't want to say everything, but you have almost everything you want. And if you don't have it, you can always get it through the internet. You can always kind of just close the door and say, I'm going to watch Def Comedy Jam or something like that, you know, and you can get back home. So I think that I don't have an answer for you. The only thing I can say is that you folks have a lot at your beck and call, and to some degree you're suffering because you have too much. You don't really feel a sense of struggle. You don't feel a sense of being oppressed. And until sometimes that happens, maybe you need to vote Romney in. Until that happens, you know I'm kidding. But until that happens, and that's his philosophy, we're not going to get over a lot of the little crap that we have as issues, you know, the color of her hair, the color of her skin, or whatever, you know. But I really would hope that we could eventually, and you could all find out and be creative about finding out how do you bring this diverse richness into something that's better than what you have. I don't know how to do that. The only thing I can tell you is that I know how to do it in 1967.
If I could address that just briefly, Wesleyan is a superb educational institution, and you're here because, or people who are here because they're intelligent. And so, and this may sound too simplistic, but the approach that I've always taken is that there is an intelligent approach and answer to every problem. And so I always found, even when I was here, that it was important to hear all of the voices, that it was important to take everybody's viewpoint into consideration, and then to apply the process of intelligence and decide what floats, what doesn't, who is important, who is not, who can make a difference, and I shouldn't say who is not, but which roles apply best to which individuals. So I think that in a situation like that, you just look at all of the pieces and do what Wesleyan teaches you to do, and you find a solution.
I think there's two things that I would, two ways I would respond, and one has to do with the topic of the panel, which is the history. It's to go back to the history and to try to really engage the history at a substantive level through the diversity archive, but also through engagement with alums and conversation. But to go back to the history doesn't mean to try to replicate everything from previous struggles, because that never works, right? It's to pick out the strategies and tactics that might be useful, and then apply them to the current context. I have this conversation with my undergraduates often around organizing in the age of social media. And we have debates about, you know, Twitter and Facebook and these other social media, you know, how useful are they? And can they replace face-to-face interactions? But that's a conversation, I can't give you an answer, I have an opinion, but I won't give that to you. But that's a conversation people need to be having, people in your generation need to be having, and to really think critically about that kind of stuff. You know, sit-ins and boycotts and takeovers and all those things. Some of those tactics are universal and will, you know, there's nothing that can replace them. And some of them, in certain situations, are going to be outdated and outmoded and aren't appropriate. And only you can decide which is which. The other thing I would say is to focus your organizing on issues and not identity. I think there's a place for coming together as students of color, as black students, as Caribbean students, as Asian American students, but it has its limitations. And one of the lessons of this history is that in many times our struggles have reached our limitations precisely on those points of identity. When I was an undergrad, as I say, I was chair of Ujima. Ujima was more or less the only black student organization at that time, at the time I started. By the time I left 4 years later, there were 3, 4, 5 other groups, and now there are probably at least a dozen, probably more. I worked as a student with the Student of Color Council, which prior to that had been the Tri-Minority Council. Groups of students trying to coming together across differences to organize around issues. There are no shortage of issues, and again, it's not our place to tell you what the issues are. Need-blind admissions is an issue that I think requires attention of current students in conjunction with alumni. But the student debt crisis as a whole, nationally, is an issue. Incarceration, mass incarceration is an issue. Climate change is an issue. There's no shortage of the issues. And I think you'll find more success organizing if you focus primarily on those issues rather than trying to focus primarily on identity.
In the back over there.
Good evening. Marina Melendez, I'm class of '83, and I'm dean here for the class of 2014. My question is about the diversity archives. If you take a walk down the Freeman Athletic Center hallways, you see photographs of the teams that have come to pass and played an important part of Wesleyan's identity. But you also see photographs of the past of Wesleyan before people of color, before women. And it's, for me, always impactful. And it reminds me of the faces in the history that we don't see. So my question is about how, and have you had the conversation, how do we start the conversation about visualizing the archives, putting them somewhere permanently on Wesleyan's walls or halls, so that I can walk through those walls and halls and feel the diversity and not just know that it's safely somewhere in the archives. Thank you.
Well, actually, we had some wonderful portraits of alumni in North College. There was a great display that did represent Wesleyan's diversity. And like all displays, it was there for quite a while, and I'm not sure where those portraits have gone or who made the decision to take them down. I think it was really just a matter of thinking that they had been there for a good while. Actually, I would say about 10 years.
Yeah.
But I think, except in the athletic areas, we really don't have much, and maybe in the library where we have a few old portraits, we don't have a lot of photographs, partly because things get stolen, unfortunately. But it's a great suggestion, and it's something that we could start working on. Why not?
This gentleman right here in the front, and then I saw a hand in the back, and then one right in the middle.
Hi, my name's Michael Steinberg, class of '83, and we had our own sit-in takeover over aid-blind admissions in '82, which is similar to the struggle on campus now. But I was just curious about more the logistics of the Fisk takeover. After the window was broken and you got in, how long were you there? Did the police come? You know, how did the negotiations go with the president? It sounds like it was a good ending, but curious.
Okay, well, Emilio tried to get me to hand it to Evans, and I reminded him that he wasn't there. And here's the problem. Now you know, we keep talking about this 43-year thing. Well, there's certain things that get really burned into your memory, like some of the things that we've been talking about, and other things that go away a bit after 43 years. I think that we may have been in there. Well, first of all, as someone pointed out, we didn't get in as easily as we would have liked because we had an impatient, one of our comrades was too impatient and broke a window or something. But then once we were in there, I don't recall that it was more than, I don't recall that we spent the night there, did we? A day? Overnight? Okay, so it was not overnight. Yeah, so we got in there at 5 o'clock in the morning, and as intelligent Wesleyan students, we got out of there we didn't spend the night there. We went back to our rooms, but it was nationally, or at least locally televised. The police did not come. Thank goodness. I recall that some people from Middletown joined us, or there were a few people from Middletown. And that's about all I can recall.
I did follow it as it was occurring. And in some years past, I did some research on it. And it was my understanding that there were many people in the administration that was urging President Etherington to call the police. And yeah, and he almost singularly resisted that and said, no, I'm going to hear them out. And because I think that at the time there had, as you all mentioned, there had been a number of these incidents on campus, and different schools reacted differently, and some of them, as you recall, were more intense than others. But as I said earlier, I think Wesleyan handled it very intelligently. They said, what are your demands? And the students gave the list of demands. And the president said, we can't tell you exactly what we're going to do, but we respect the fact that you are seeking some level of personal dignity within our community. And so we will respond to these demands. And if we agree to respond to these demands, will you leave the building? And from my understanding, the students said, we don't have to stay hungry. Yeah, you know, we've made a statement, we're not going to jail. And the very positive upshot of that is that by the time I came, or at the end of my freshman year, we had what was called the African American Institute. And I believe Ed Sanders and maybe Thurman Northcross were the co-directors who had just graduated. They were just seniors, so they were the co-directors of what's now CAS. So it was fledgling, but it was kind of a two-sided effort. And the president said, I'll give you a shot. And they said, that's all we need. And that's where it went from there.
Just to re-emphasize what Evan said, he's exactly right. And even though I was young, I remember being impressed by my upperclassmen when they made the decision in the evening to say, okay, well, they're going to talk to us, they're going to negotiate with us, so let's get out of here. And it was a real display of intelligence. To contrast that, being from Ohio, I had friends that went to Kent State, and I happened to go visit a couple of my friends at Kent State about 2 days after the students were killed, shot down on campus. So that's a big contrast.
So we had something to be afraid of.
Yeah, exactly.
But like I said before, Wesleyan was a learning institution, and I didn't mean that they taught people, but that they themselves learned, that the management was enlightened enough to realize that pressures could be utilized to make the organization better. And I've been involved in business not all my life, but ever since Columbia Business School. And I know that a lot of times one of the best ways to change an organization is when you do have crises and things that kind of unfreeze the present state and allow you to move people to a better state and then to reset into a higher or better environment or better state. So I think Ted Etherington, even though he came from the American Stock Exchange, was a very adept, organized chief executive. I got to give him his props on that.
Okay. In the back.
Allison Johnson, class of '83. For those of you who are involved in the takeover, have you been inside Fisk Hall in recent years? And if so, how did it feel?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the first time that at least I was involved in a commemorative exercise for Fisk Hall was held in Fisk Hall. And this was maybe, about 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And it was quite a unique feeling because, and I have to admit that while I did remember it from the perspective of the takeover, and we had pictures, so that kind of tied it together. We had some pictures from the takeover. What I think I probably remembered more was going to class there, So that was that. It felt good because of what we were doing at that time. It was really, I think, just me and Evans talking, and good feeling.
It was sort of like a tipping point for us here at Wesleyan, because then we got the Black House, and then we organized Ujamaa, and then we had a center for our Black life. But going back to Fisk Hall earlier this year, was it this year or last year? It was last year, okay. And we had a little symposium sort of like this. It was a bit eerie and surreal because I remember it was almost like I had been in a cave and I discovered fire, and then I went back into the cave and there was no fire. So it was kind of like, wow, there's a big cavern and there's really nothing happening here. Plus it was empty, it was at night, it was empty. So it didn't have the life and the vitality that it had when we were there. But that's just, time and place.
I think it was last February that we commemorated, I don't know, some of the students might have been there. But I'll tell you what struck me. The room was filled with students. I mean, it was packed to the brim. And for the life of me, I couldn't understand why students would want to know about something that happened way before they were born. And I kept thinking about when I was a student here, would I go hear some guy talk about something that happened way before I even knew what Wesleyan was about? So, I remember commending the students for showing up, but the whole time, the atmosphere of being in Fisk Hall and seeing so many students was just overwhelming to me that they had the interest. And it just communicated to me that they too viewed what happened as kind of a watershed event in terms of Wesleyan's history with diversity.
And I could say the same thing about today with all of you here and being back in the chapel here, which of course I remember well too. Same thing. It's really good that people are still interested, and besides, it makes us old guys feel better,
I think this person, and then.
Hi, my name is Elsa Hardy, and I'm a junior African American Studies major, and I am also a Mellon Mays undergraduate fellow. And I came to Wesleyan largely because of the AFAM program here, so I'm extremely grateful to you and your classmates, because without you guys, we wouldn't have this amazing program that has been a defining experience for me at Wesleyan. But since coming here, I've been really interested in the fact that the AFAM program is called African American Studies rather than Black Studies or African Diasporic Studies or something like that. So I'm just wondering if you know why that is, and if you are involved in the actual naming process of the program.
Was your question why do we use African American Institute? Is that what your question?
African American rather than Black or African.
Oh, okay. Well, when I was in high school, we were Negroes. And since my parents come from Puerto Rico, we were colored in Spanish, personas de color. And then as we evolved, we then saw that that our ethnicity as people from Africa was being used against us, our beauty standard, our African beauty standard was being used against us. And we were being taught that we had the bad looking hair, the skin, nobody wanted a tan. You know, of course you see John Boehner now and Romney with all kinds of tans, right? And you know, a lot of our white cousins, they have dreadlocks too. So we then moved to black, and we made black positive. Just like I believe some of our brothers and sisters who are gay made fag positive. They took the power away from the person who was using it against them. Because I gotta tell you, a lot of white folks, when we had accepted the fact that black was cool, they would say, well, you know, a black, because they were afraid to say it because they had used it so negatively in the past. But we just took that away. And then eventually, I believe it was Jesse Jackson, and he's the one who then, I believe, began to promote African Americans so that we were, and you might know better than I, Professor, so that we were situated in some part of the world, because there was no black country or no black continent. And certainly there was no Negro continent.
That's a really interesting question, and we could talk for an entire symposium on that, actually. But I think that even before, Emilio's right, it was Jesse Jackson who popularized the term African American. But even before that, there were people that were talking about Afro-American studies and that kind of thing. Personally, I don't use African American. You know, I still use black. You know, I don't agree with the idea that I'm a hyphenated American. My family goes back 6 generations, you know. So, but I understand the reason, and I think that Emilio touched on part of the reason that it went through those machinations and eventually got to African American. And that's because as much as we did do to try and change the term black or black American from something that was negative to something that was positive, we never quite shook it. We never quite shook it, and I think that especially older generation, people that are older than us, the older generation that was able to influence things, kind of never really got comfortable with the whole black and I'm proud thing. And so the first chance they got, they came up with something else, African American. And you know, that's my take on it. You know, I don't really especially like it because I don't think it describes things accurately. But anyway.
I think right here.
Hi, my name is LaShawn Springer. I'm class of 08. Thank you to all of you for sharing your stories with me today. I was also an African American Studies major while I was here, and Professor Rushdie was actually my academic advisor, so thank you to everyone on the panel. I used to work in admissions here at Wesleyan, and now I'm a college counselor at a school, and so every time I hear stories such as yours, it continues to incense me even more to think that we now have Fisher versus UT that's taking place right now, and struggling to reconcile how we can listen to these type of stories and know they exist, but still have iterations of these type of cases coming before the Supreme Court. So just was wondering about your take on what's happening now, real consequences as a result of what may happen in this court case. Just want to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, the main thing I would say is that you have to understand, and I tried to allude to this before, not that much has changed. And yes, you're right. You see things sort of being buried for a while and then resurfacing, and buried for a while and resurfacing. But the truth of the matter is 40 years is not a long time. It's 40 revolutions of the planet around the sun. It's like that. When you get to be 60 years old like me, you can look at 40 years and see that it's like that. It's just like that. And these kinds of issues take longer than 40 years to change. I mean, think about it now in terms of black people in this country. We were actually enslaved for 250 years. And then another 100 years of Jim Crow, segregation. And then we've had, this period now of what, well, there's a book that you guys might want to read by Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow, which talks about mass incarceration. Wonderful book, seminal book, in fact. But we're in another period now. So from one perspective, that's what it is. It's just not that much time. And personally, I would say also that I don't, and I could have said that, I could have told you this in 1969 when I was at Wesleyan. You're not going to get real change. Racism is a symptom. It's a symptom of economic oppression. It always has been, always will be. The reason that people decided to go over and engage in slave trade was for free labor. That's what it was for. And all the rest of the stuff that they built up in terms of, black people being inferior and blah, 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 that was to justify free labor. That's what it was about. So until you get significant change in the impetus for profit, in people putting capital above labor, profit above people, until that is changed, you're going to continue to see the tools that they use to justify that kind of oppression. And racism is one of the main ones they use. So it's cyclic, and it continues to happen. So if Josh was talking about issues. There's some real issues out there that you guys can can organize around that have nothing to do with your ethnicity or the diversity thing. And most of the things that you see in the news now that we're talking about, whether it be affirmative action or whether it be the war or whether it be, all of them usually end up boiling back down to economics.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. I was going to say, I was listening to you.
Okay, well, did that answer your question? Was that? Okay.
All right. Go ahead.
Well, just very quickly, I think one of the problems with the debate around affirmative action is that it's shrouded in misrepresentations. And so part of the conversation we need to have has to deal in fact, has to deal in the kind of empirical studies of affirmative action and the success of affirmative action. This also has to do with what George said about its very limited time span that we've had official affirmative action policies in this country. 4 decades, not quite 5 decades, compared to what preceded it. So people need to understand that. People need to understand other kinds of affirmative action that have benefited majority white Americans. There's a brilliant book by the political scientist Ira Katz-Nelson. It's called When Affirmative Action Was White. And it talks about the expansion of the American middle class starting in the 1930s, but particularly in the post-war period, and the ways in which those policies, we talk about the GI Bill, you talk about housing subsidies, you can go on down the line, that African Americans and other people of color were excluded from. And so until we really understand that history, we're not really going to understand affirmative action. And then the last thing I'll say is that I think many of us who are beneficiaries of affirmative action have to be able to stand up and say that we were beneficiaries and not be ashamed of it. I would not be on this stage today if it were not for 2 things, need blind admissions and affirmative action. And I succeeded at Wesleyan. I graduated with honors. I got a PhD from Yale, and I teach at Princeton. But that's all facilitated by people in the admissions office who saw in me some potential and were willing to take a chance. And I think part of the conversation has to be bolstering those people in positions who are gatekeepers to take chances on students. But more importantly is the conversation around public education in this country and what we're going to do to expand people's ability to even be in a position to apply to elite institutions like this one.
I think this will be the last question.
One thing I wanted, your question brought to mind, I was watching a video the other day it was Elaine Brown, who was a brilliant member of the Black Panther Party who is still speaking, and they were talking about affirmative action, and she said she was speaking up in some really small town, small college up in far northern New York, and she had finished her speech, and it was pretty much an all-white crowd, and one of the guys stood up and said, well, you know, I'm a middle-class person, and I tried to get into the school, and I lost my slot because of a black person who got affirmative action, and was able to get the slot. And Elaine looked at him and said, well, first of all, your premise is wrong. You're not middle class. You're poor. If you were middle class, you could afford the tuition. So what are you talking about? And that, to me, is why I say that it really all gets back down to economics. But here's the bottom line with the hope, from my perspective, with affirmative action. That is that education should be free, period. Not just primary school, college. Education should be free. You shouldn't have to pay $40,000 a year to go to school. It baffles my mind as to why we're talking about all this stuff, you know, when in fact, why does it cost $200,000 to get a college education? It doesn't have to cost that much. So why are we assuming that we have to compete to get an education?
I think the best way to deal with affirmative action, I'm sorry, Professor, I'll be very brief. Colin Powell was asked this question one time on TV by a white reporter, she asked him, General Powell, don't you think that affirmative action makes a black person feel insecure or less than a white person because they're getting a job under less than equal criteria? And he said, well, let me tell you what I would say to this person. He said, take the job, work really hard, make a lot of money, and if you're feeling insecure, use your money to go to a psychiatrist. Okay? He said, don't give it up, but just make sure you take advantage of what's there for you. I like what Joshua said. He's on point. I'd love to take one of his classes. But I gotta tell you one thing that I did not know when I was at Wesleyan. And it has been a continuing revelation for me. And I had to learn this from my 40-year-old son, who lived for a time in the Shenandoah Valley. Because I used to talk about the poverty of black people, and he said, Dad, if you ever saw the white folks in Shenandoah Valley, they ain't got no teeth, they ain't got no shoes, the kids are running around with no Pampers on, and they're worse than the kids in the ghetto. And so I only say that because, as George said, it's an economic thing, and until I realize now even more than I did before that white people buy more into the falsehood of either capitalism or racism, and it hurts them too, because as a result of that, the people in power, the 1%, take a massive advantage of them. Now I'm seeing the time being articulated and called. So I'll shut up.
Do we have the time for the last question, or that's? Then excuse me, the question. I'd like to invite you all. Janelle Davis is going to speak. I'd just like you, before she starts, to thank you all for coming, and to join me in thanking the people who've educated us here today about the experiences at Wesleyan and the way that this institution has become what it has become. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and I promise to be brief so that we can attend the wonderful reception that's been prepared for us. But my name is Janelle Davis. I am the current Black Alumni Chair, class of '99, AFM major. Really excited and very honored to be here tonight, and just would like to ask another round of applause for our wonderful panelists this evening.